I mean, there's a lot of stuff right now going on where they don't actually want parents involved. They want to control the kids. They think that the school is the professionals, the experts, and that they know the best policies for masks, they know the best policies for curriculum. That's where they're getting all this social emotional learning and critical race theory and the queer theory, gender theory stuff rammed into the schools. And they're like, no, parents, if you don't like this, you're not the experts, you don't understand. And you're seeing school boards where, they're not taking public comments, or they're limiting those rather significantly now, because I don't think they do want parents speaking up. I don't think they want parents involved at this point.
The thing about it is, if you look at it reasonably, like if there was any other time in history, in the history of like my life, and you thought of parents coming in to tell teachers how the kids should be taught, you're like, well, what do the parents know? But then when you see some of the ridiculous shit that kids are getting taught in school today, and then if you follow like libs of TikTok, and you see some of these crazy groomer teachers,
yeah,
it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre to see these people making these videos because they're doing it like out in the open. They're like, we are going to teach your kids the right things. We are going to teach your kids to respect us. We are going to teach your kids to, like whatever theories that they want. Like, and they're doing it in this weird, arrogant assertion that they're going to indoctrinate these children into their ideology. And they're literally like mocking or taunting the parents that we're going to do this to your kids.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the motivation. I don't understand why they would make those videos. I don't understand why anybody would hire those people to be teachers, and why they wouldn't fire them immediately upon seeing those videos. I know they did fire that one teacher. I think she was a professor who was talking about people who are attracted to underage people, that we shouldn't call them pedophiles.
Yeah, that was a professor, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
She said we shouldn't call them pedophiles.
Yeah.
We should call them minor attracted.
Minor attracted persons.
Yeah.
Which the MAP, but the P in MAP should just stand for pedophile, because that's what minor attracted means.
Well, this idea that, like, you can be a pedophile but not act on it, which I guess is true. I guess for some reason you could be attracted to children and not act on it. The question is, like, what has happened? How does that happen? Like, what is it about a human that would have that sick inclination to want to have a sexual interaction with a child? Like, what is that?
I don't know. I do know how it got into schools. That I've researched.
Well, please tell me how.
Well, I mean, a lot of people don't know that the radicals of the 60s, there's this book, it's called The Critical Turn in Education, and I've been doing a podcast series on this book. It's written by a guy named Isaac Gottesman. He's a Marxist education theorist from Iowa State, and at the very beginning, it's like literally the first sentence of the book, he says, well, where did all the radicals from the 60s go? Well, they didn't go to yuppiedom, they didn't go to, I forget what, he lists a couple of things. He says, no, they went to their classroom. And so a lot of those radicals, those violent radicals, 68, 69, early 70s, we could name Angela Davis, for example, as a key figure, literally went to K through 12 activism. And through the 70s, they kind of prepared the ground. By about 1985, though, what this so-called critical turn in education, which means critical theory, or as this Gottsman says, he says we shouldn't call it critical theory, we should call it what it is. We call it critical Marxism. By about 85, these guys had basically become dominant in terms of setting teacher college training. So if you're going to go to teacher college somewhere, Marxists are teaching you how, and they bring in this guy from Brazil. His name's Paulo Freire, straight up Marxist educator. I've read his books. He's like quotes Marx. He quotes Lenin. He's like, this is how it should be. He's got this total weird idea, like teachers and students, the kids shouldn't have, adults and children shouldn't have like a differential in power. They should be like equals with one another, which is a terrible idea because kids need structure and boundaries, and especially in a learning environment.
Why would anybody? What's the motivation behind that?
The goal is to train them in what he calls conscientization. I didn't say that right. It's a hard word to say, and here we are. But to raise in them what's called a critical consciousness, which is a Marxist consciousness of oppression in society. Basically, he's looking around and he says people are going to realize that they're dependent based on the society that they live in. And rather than saying, okay, maybe you are, maybe you're working a shit job, maybe you're stuck, let's teach you responsibility, how to take control of your own life and, raise yourself up and work hard and put your head down or whatever. He says, no, we're going to go the collective route instead of the individual route. We're going to try to have a revolution. Freire famously says in this book from 85, which brought him into the U.S., a book called The Politics of Education, he says that the revolution, meaning communist revolution has to be perpetual. He says if a revolution ceases to be a revolutionary, it becomes a status quo. And so he says, as you awaken to this critical consciousness, this conscientization, which I still can't say. Anyway, it means to awaken to consciousness. And so their goal by the mid-'80s in education was to start turning education more and more and more along this erase all power differentials, awaken a consciousness, and this queer theory stuff fits right within that. So you're doing that at the identity level by breaking down the barriers between gay and straight, male and female, etc. So it latches right into that. In fact, the communists have been using techniques in sexual liberation, etc. back to the 1920s. This dude, George Lukács, that overthrew Hungary or helped overthrow Hungary in their communist revolution in 1919 was he became like their deputy commissar of education, and his whole thing was like, let's sexualize the kids because it'll break them away from their religion, it'll break them away from their parents. They'll hate their parents because they won't understand, you know. And so he's like, let's sexualize the kids. This has been a thing that they've done throughout a lot of communist attempts, whether in the 20s and 30s and then again in the 60s with, you know, Herbert Marcuse leading like the sexual liberation kind of side of Marxism through the 60s. And they're doing it again. And so these people are Marxists. They started to take over education schools, and they're not going to say no to this stuff when it comes knocking on the door. So this book, again, Critical Turn in Education, says it went in 3 stages. First, there was Marxist critiques in education. Then by the mid-'80s and early 90s, the post-structuralist feminists took over the critique of education, and that's where they brought the queer stuff in. And I mean queer with like official queer theory. I'm not doing let's be clear for the people who hate us.
Look at the queer stuff.
Yeah, the queer stuff. Yeah. And which, by the way, the definition of that is an identity without an essence. I did this podcast about this paper by Hannah Dyer. She wrote a paper in 2016 about queer futurity in education, something. Early childhood education. And she says in there explicitly that the point of queer theory is not to create a stable LGBTQ identity. It's in fact to not have stable identities at all, because those become the status quo, and that would be the problem. So you have to be constantly overturning that. I don't know if you know who Dan Savage is.
Yeah.
Yeah, It Gets Better, that guy.
Mm-hmm.
The whole last third of the paper is criticizing It Gets Better, saying, well, that means he's just admitting that it's bad for kids. Like, it's this message of hope that was super effective at curbing.
And it gets better means reaching out to young gay kids to tell them that there's going to come a point in time when it's going to feel okay.
Yeah, like,
it's going to be better.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll find your community.
Yeah,
there's a lot of us out there.
It's awkward now. Like, life's weird. It's hard. It's maybe it's harder for you because of some stuff you didn't sign up for, and it gets better, man. Don't give up. It gets better. And he even has this messaging in there, like, it's going to make you stronger. You know, it's super positive, actually. And so she just takes him to task for this. So this is the post-structural feminists turned into the queer theorists.